Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Great. All right, thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks. Okay, can you guys hear me all right? Great. Let's go ahead and get started then. So my name is Scott Wells. I've met some of you before, some in person, some over email, things like that. But I am the developer of a tool called Illuminated Cloud, and I'm going to show some of the features that are coming up in Illuminated Cloud tonight. Actually, some that have been recently released, some that are about to be released, and some that are going to be coming up in the next major version. I'll spend about a minute just giving a little background on myself. That's probably the least interesting part to you, I know. So I have been working in the software industry since the mid-90s. Professionally, did a lot of hobbyist programming before that. Primarily in Java, C, C++, and then I got into the Salesforce world in 2010, working for an ISV. And along the way, I found myself very frustrated with the state of tooling. I know I'm not necessarily alone in that. And in some quote-unquote spare time, started working on a little side project that evolved into what I'm about to show you. The demo of Illuminated Cloud is not going to be kind of an intro to it. I have several of those that have been posted online, presentations from Dreamforce. What I want to do is talk about some of the new features. You'll pick up on some of the existing features just kind of by side effect of what I'm going to demo. So with that, what I'd like to do is just dive into it. We can make this interactive. If you have questions, feel free, but we can also hold them until the end and you know, just do kind of a Q&A at the end. So three major categories of things I'm going to talk about here. One of them is going to be Salesforce DX. I'm going to save that for the last half so that it's kind of a contiguous overview of some new features. So some of the earlier features I'm going to talk about are actually going to be things that are not yet released. They'll be in the 2.0 version of the product, and I'll talk at the end a little bit about when that's coming, and it's coming very soon. So Intellij IDEA, if you used it for Java, you're probably used to some of the refactoring capabilities, the really intelligent like client-side code inspections, basically looking at your code and telling you what's wrong with it, helping you fix it, things like that. You know, I've definitely been missing those. While I've implemented a lot of things in Illuminated Cloud, I've really wanted to be able to do things like, this is called right-to-left programming. I think about what it is, the data that I need and where it is, I express that, and then I basically put it where I want to use it. And let me show you what I mean. So, .sObjectType.getDescribe. So I want the describe for account. Well, I'm just going to extract that into a variable, right? So that's one keystroke. It's in a variable, suggests some names, and so I didn't actually have to, you know, go through the rote exercise of starting on the left-hand side and typing out a variable declaration. What it is it that you want? What do you want to do with it? So in this case, from the type describe, I want to get the name, and again, I'm just going to extract that into a variable, and it'll be the name, and you know, then let's say that I want to get a substring off of that. And so I'll just say 0, comma, did I put a comma there? Name.length. Wow. Helps if I actually type the right thing. .length. And again, I can just extract that whole thing out. It makes writing your code very, very, very fast. And it actually is smart enough to understand if you've got complex expressions. For example, here, there's 6 different concatenations. If I go out, I can actually walk through the various expressions and tell it which one I want. And it knows at runtime what those expressions are. So it definitely makes it very easy to get, so this is my account number describe. Very easy to just kind of get through your code and start writing it. There's another feature I've really wanted for a long time, and actually this is the #1 feature that the users of Illuminated Cloud have asked me for, and that is, let's just go over here and take a look at this, and you can see when I highlight this, all the things that actually have a little purple background on it there. That's all the references to that variable, and I want to rename that variable, so a refactor rename. And so I'm just going to go in here, it's going to give me a lot of suggestions, I'm going to rename it. This is not a global search and replace. This is actually a semantically aware rename operation. So if I actually add a new private variable with the same name, you'll see that only it highlights here, it doesn't highlight here, do the same rename. So it actually is very smart about what it's doing. It's looking at the code, it's treating it as the code that it actually represents. And this isn't just for local variables. If I move over here, I actually have a class, base and inderived class relationship. And so I can go over here and move to the subclass of this, and you know, I've got a reference to this. If I go and rename the base class, and one thing I'll show you real quick is, let's move over here and look at the files, because if you've ever had to go through renaming an Apex class, you have to go touch so many things manually. And so we've got the class file, we have the meta XML file, we have the related references, things like that. We'll go back over and we'll just rename this file, and I'll go ahead and call this my super class. And let's go back over to the file system, and base class is gone, and here's superclass. And we can go back into the derived class, and it actually now is superclass.interclass, and everything's hanging together properly. So it takes care of pretty much everything for you. So you finally get the ability to evolve your code base the way that you would want to, without having to go do just a lot of manual operations in the file system. And all this is atomic, by the way. It did all that for me. I'm just going to do an undo, and it'll basically change everything back. So base class is renamed. If we go look in the file system, superclass is gone, base class is back. Sure.
When does it actually push it up to the server?
So that's a good question. So that's up to you. That's up to you. If you want to push it up right now, you can go ahead and push it up. One of the things that's not in here, this is a feature of 2.0, so it's not 100% complete yet. One of the things that I'm going to be putting in here is accruing all the changes that have happened and giving the ability to prompt right then, do you want to go run the deploy and destructive changes and all that to make your site whole? Right, because it's not just what you put there, it's what you take away, right? Okay. And if you're working in a Salesforce DX realm, a push would do that for you. But if you're working in a traditional metadata API, then you need to actually keep track of that, and IC is going to take care of that for you. Yeah, but good question. One of the other refactorings that's already in place, and I'll talk about some of the ones that aren't and what the plans are. As you can see here, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, some of these things are gray. So you look at interclass, and it's definitely kind of a lighter shade. I don't know how it's showing up on the screen, but it's gray. And so let's take a look at what happens. If I want to go over here, I can do what's called a safe delete, which means if there are no incoming references to this that are detected, you can delete it. It's not something I'm using, right? And so if I do a safe delete of, say, base class, it says, do I want to go search for usages? And it'll also allow you to look in non-code usages, say comments. Maybe you commented out a usage while you're trying something else. And go ahead and do that. It's going to say, hey, you may not want to do this. There's some usages down here. But if I click this do refactor, it'll go ahead and do it. It'll leave me with broken code, but it'll go ahead and do it. In this case, I'm going to cancel that out. However, this method down here, if I do a safe delete on that, search, it's gone. It just deleted that out of my code base. So in just a moment, I'm going to show you kind of a corollary to that that's actually really important. It comes to just owning the total cost of ownership of your code base over time. But for a moment, I want to talk about refactoring. So you just saw rename, introduce variable, and safe delete. There are a lot of other refactorings, and they will be coming in. I'm trying to do them in the order of what I think will have the highest utility to developers, but introduce constant, move, copy, extract method, all those are going to be coming into play. Extract method's probably the most complex, so it'll probably come in last because I'd prefer to have more functionality first. But the point is I'm going to actually be doubling down on refactorings with the goal of actually rounding out the full suite of refactorings. But with 2.0, it's not just refactorings that I've added. So let's go over here and take a look. So we saw here that this was grayed out. This is called a code inspection. It's actually saying that there's no usage of this in the code base. It's amazing because if you go scan your code base where you haven't had this before and run it, and in fact we can do that. I'll take this code base and I'm going to go run an inspection. I'm going to use the unused declaration for Salesforce Inspection. I'm going to go run across the code base. Keep in mind that this is kind of a demo test code base, so there are going to be quite a few of these. But it's going to show me all the code that has no incoming references. In a production app, that's probably something you're paying a cost to maintain unnecessarily, right? Now it's important that it find incoming references. Things like Apex REST services won't have a direct reference necessarily, but it's being called from the outside world. Like implementations of schedulable or batch Apex. It takes all that into account. It understands external entry points into the system. But you can go through this and you can actually see them. If you wanted, and if you really wanted to say caveat emptor on your code base, you could just hit this button right here and it would whack all that out of your code base. Don't do that. I recommend that you not do that. What I recommend that you do is walk through these, and with each one, take a look and say, what should I do with this? So for example, taking a look at this guy. I actually plan to use this. For the moment, I just want to get rid of the noise. So one of the things I can do, there are these things called intentions. Intentions are quick fixes, and there are several things it can do. If I hit Alt-Enter, it comes out and says, do you want to get rid of this? I don't want to get rid of this, so I can just move over and say, I want to suppress this for right now. I don't want to get rid of it. I just want you to stop complaining about it for now. So if I rerun this inspection, you don't keep warning me about this. And it adds a little comment at the top with the name of the inspection. This works for all the inspections, and you can suppress it to get it out of your face. If there's an inspection that you don't care about at all, and I'll show one in just a few moments, but you can actually go and disable it if you want, if you just don't like the information that's given categorically across the entire code base. But what I recommend that you do is kind of go through your code base, look at them, either suppress it or get rid of the code. It doesn't support transitive dependencies. So for example, if I get rid of this class and it was using other code, and those are the only references to that code, that's technically dead code too. It's not walking that whole graph. I'm going to add that a little bit later. IntelliJ does that for Java. But right now, and I just did this against a rather large code base, it took me about 4 passes. I ran it, I audited, I got rid of a ton of code. It was like the best PR ever because there was all this red on the left, just stuff we didn't ever have to look at again. And then I just did it like 2 or 3 more times, and at that point, the inspection came back with nothing reported because I either said this is stuff I want to keep, stop telling me about it, or I just got rid of it. So that's one of the inspections. I've implemented several inspections already. I'm going to be adding a ton of them, but let's take a look at maybe one of the other inspections. One of my goals here is to try to get to a point where, and I'm sure that you've experienced this if you've written Salesforce code, you have no idea if the code that you have locally is ready to go to the server. You send it to the server and it comes back with a ton of errors and you go fix some of them, you send it to the server, wash, rinse, repeat until finally the server says, hey, I accept this, and then you go see if it's actually good code. I'm trying to get to a point that we can validate as much of that on the client as possible without ever having to talk to the server. So for example, if I went over here and accidentally misspelled this with one L, it turns red. That's an unresolvable declaration.
So this is maybe getting too nitty-gritty.
No, that's fine. That's why we're here.
Are you writing your own compiler or lexical parser, or how are you doing this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, from the get-go with IC, I started by writing a parser for Apex and SOQL and SOSL. And then the other thing that it's doing on the fly is it is calculating, it's doing type inference. It's calculating the evaluated type expression of every expression as you type in the system. And that's how it's able to do all this. That's why completion works. That's why reference navigation works, because it knows what everything is and how to get to it. Yeah, and all these inspections are based on that. Yeah, absolutely. It's just what I do with my spare time, I guess. But the point is yeah, I mean, this, if it's red, it's not ready to go. The server's not going to like it either. So right now there are no intentions for that. There's nothing, if you said try to go solve that, it's not going to do anything. One of the main intentions I plan to add is if there are instances of that symbol, but they're only available through a namespace qualification, just like if you were working in Java or some other language and it would tell you where you can go import to get access to that, it'll tell you what namespaces it's available in, and it'll go ahead and add a namespace qualification for you, because there's no real concept of an import. But these types of quick fixes, so you don't have to go do the rote stuff anymore. You basically just let it find it and fix it. Another inspection I'm planning on adding is one if there's basically a mismatch between the types, and you need to use a cast operator, you need to change the receiving type. We can do that for you. We can detect it. It can see that, and it can say, okay, I can add a cast here, or I can take the left-hand side and turn it into the, the more narrow type, things like that, or the wider type in that case. So that will be one of the inspections. Here's another one that I've added, and again, this one to me was near and dear to my heart, and you may not agree with it, but if I type if true SD high, right? So if I type that, notice that it put a little yellow marker on that. What it's telling me, and we can take a look at this, is that we have a control flow statement without braces. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. The grammar accepts it. But you know what? I don't know if you've ever written like Python or something like that, indentation based. I might be tempted to go put another line under that, and guess what? That's wrong logic. That line's not part of that block. So you can run this across a code base, and the intention is add braces to it. And this isn't just for if, while, do, try, whatever. Well, actually try is fine because you can't actually do it, but any of the flow control statements, it'll take care of it for you. So just run across your code base and just one button click, it'll go fix all that for you. Again, if you don't agree with that, you can disable the inspection. Sure.
Can you change how it fixes it? Whether or not, if you have style guidelines for your team where, you have the opening bracket on the new line, or opening bracket on the same line?
Yeah, so your question is, if I want to have the braces where they're supposed to be for people who like at the end of line, well, what I can do is go into the Apex code formatter and go to wrapping and braces and say that I prefer end of line.
Cool.
And now when I go over here, I hit the wrong setting. It always helps if you do the right setting. It's actually and then down here, end of line, and then also SOQL. Yeah, if you've not seen it before, there are about 150 code formatter options. And now let's go fix it. And that's what you wanted, right? So yeah, you can fix that. You can also share the code formatter. I don't like that, by the way, so I'm gonna change it back. But no, it's a religious thing. That's why code formatters exist. but if I don't do this, I'll forget it. But the point is that you can actually set the code formatter up the way that you want and set it up as a project scope code formatter. It gets saved with a project metadata. You'll check that into your version control. Everybody gets the same thing. And then the other thing you can do with version control, and I'm getting a little bit kind of out of bounds here, but this is really important, is when you go to check in, one of the things that you can do if you use the integrated version control is you can say, I want to go and reformat my code before I check in. Just have everybody do that, and everybody's working off the same format. So it's really nice. So other code inspections. Here's one again that this one's very personal to me. So Apex and actually SOQL and Social and Visualforce, these are case-insensitive languages. That's fine. Nothing inherently wrong with that. Except for the fact that if you have a lot of people contributing in the same code base, just like inconsistent code formatting, I don't know if you've ever gone into a code base where a lot of people have contributed and you see the exact same identifier with like 15 different ways of capitalizing things. Maybe lowercase, maybe uppercase, where it's screaming at you, whatever. Same with keywords. Here's a legitimate one. I know people that feel like the DML keywords, insert, upsert, things like that, should be uppercase just like the keywords in the query language, even though technically those are two different contexts, because they're two sides of the same coin, right? They're basically how you get data out and how you put data in. It's technically an Apex operator keyword, should be the same case as the others. But the point is if I go and say on assert equals, if I go over here and change the case of this to be lowercase and change the case of null to be all uppercase, a couple of things turn yellow there. So what it's telling me is it's telling me that the usage case doesn't match the authoritative case, the declaration case. And we can see the declaration here, and we can see that it's capital E, right? In this case, there is an authoritative casing on that. So it'll allow you to go out and just basically fix that. And similar over here, it's saying that the keyword doesn't match the preferred case or kind of canonical case. This one's a little bit more subjective, right? Because nobody really says what that is. If you look at the Salesforce documentation, they use one case in one instance and another case in another. So for me, right now, this is kind of like the old Henry Ford thing. You can have it any color you want, as long as that color is black. Right now, you can have it any case you want, as long as it's the one that I've programmed. But this is something I do plan to make configurable so that you can go out and say for completions and for this inspection, what's the case you want for all these various keywords? So it'll be up to your team or you individually as to what that is. The point is, all these code inspections coming in hopefully improve the quality of your code base and reduce cycle time as you're trying to get code into the server. And while this is just the beginning of the inspections that I've added, the plan is there are like 200 or 300 of these in Java. I've kind of prioritized them based on my own input and things I run into and then feedback from users, and I'm just trying to work through them in priority order of what would have the highest benefit to users in terms of shortening cycle times and keeping consistency in code bases. There's a couple of others that I threw in here a little bit earlier. These are not on the fly ones, but they take some of the semantic or static code analyzers that are out there for Apex based on PMD, and then for JavaScript and Lightning, and they integrate them directly into the tool. And so you can just go run these across the code base. They don't run on the fly, but you can run them across the code base, and then the output gets integrated directly in here. So there's no intentions to fix these, but it'll tell you what the problems are, and you can go and set up your own rule set, things like that. So there's a lot of information coming into you through the client tool. So those are a couple of 2.0 features or classes of 2.0 features that are coming out. And again, I'll talk about the timing of that a little bit later, but the general theme of 2.0 is to take these things that make modern IDEs for other more mainstream languages almost magical and bring them to Salesforce development. I mean, now we have code completion and navigation and things like that. Let's go get the things that really change the way that you write code and bring them into this world. So that's what we're doing here. That's what I'm doing here. So the next thing I want to show is a couple of other features that have gone in pretty recently. And I'm not sure if people actually caught this. One, the toolbar up here. If you use Illuminated Cloud, in order to get to the various actions, push my metadata to the server, pull it back. I want to go and generate the SDK, the offline symbol table. I want to be able to get to the various configuration screens. It's one-click access at this point. Very, very convenient access. So these are up here. They're available. One of the other ones I want to point out is this, open connection. Your project's connections are at the top, above this the splitter. Below that are all the ones that you've ever configured. It's one-click access to be able to just log into any of your orgs that you've configured through the application. So very, very convenient to get in. A lot of people use browser plugins for these, browser extensions, things like that. Want to just make it really easy. So now I'm logged in this org and I can go do whatever I want. And it's not just this org, I can get into any org I've ever configured in here. So for me, in my day job as an ISV, I've got a couple of our CI orgs in case I need to go take a look at what's going on. I've got a demo org used by our product owners, things like that for convenient one-click access. Another thing that I wanted to show is if you've used the integrated unit testing, if you want to set up a unit test run configuration for all of your Apex classes, well, you occasionally, as you add new classes, had to come in here and uncheck the top up here, and you had to check it again, right? Up here, you had to come uncheck, check in order to get it to pick up everything. Now there's just, you can have an all test config, you can actually check this in for your team, so it's just always there and it'll run all the tests. And the other thing that I wanted to show over here is when you're inside a test, there's now these little gutter markers that if I want to just go run this test, and if I want to run it, say, with coverage, I can just go over here and click once. I can do it at the method level, I can do it at the test class level, whatever it happens to be. Just if you take 3 clicks and turn it into 1, you do that repeatedly throughout the day, you just bought yourself time, right? Little things like that. So those are some of the things that have gone into kind of the primary product, but one of the other things that I wanted to show here is Salesforce DX. And so this project I have open is a traditional project. It's a metadata API project, as everyone's used to. If I want to go work with the Salesforce DX project, what do I need to do? And so I happen to have one right over here. It's the Dreamhouse project that I think most people have probably looked at. And I'm just going to open it up and I'll open a new window. I didn't have to swap applications. I didn't have to close this down and open it or change a mode. I actually still have the other one open. It's a single application and it understands based on the information in the file system what type of a project it is and just adapts. And so we can see that it adapted because when I come over here, those buttons up there, now it has push and pull instead of deploy and retrieve and delete. Because that's really it. You just basically say, take what I have locally and make the org look like that, or take what's in the org if I made changes there and bring it in locally. I really want to get these things in sync. Those operations, and then additionally, when I go back over here, you'll see there's a different icon. So this icon has a DX on it. It's a connection, but what it is a scratch org. What's happened in Illuminated Cloud is I've folded scratch orgs in as connections. The same idiom is used underneath, and it can be used anywhere in the application that you could traditionally use a connection. I'll show that in a moment. So I can just click on that, and it's going to go log me into that scratch org. It's picking up all that information by driving the CLI. It's running the CLI commands in their programmatic mode where they spit out JSON in order to get that information, processing it and using it to drive it here. But that's all under the hood. You don't have to worry about that. These are just the same operations that you've been using. It just happens to be working on DX. And if we go back over here, you can see that it's definitely DX because we've got our scratch org def JSON files, and we have a lot more flexibility. This is one of the best things about Salesforce DX, the flexibility in the way you organize your files in the file system. You don't end up with like a single classes folder with 700 classes and all their meta XML side by side, and you have no idea how to get to what you're looking for. You can see that there are some product classes up here, and you can see in this nice little green area, this is set up automatically for you in IntelliJ as a test source root. And IntelliJ knows how to treat that separately. And so your test classes are down here, separated things. You can see over here that your .object files, if you're not familiar with it, metadata decomposition will actually take what have traditionally been composite metadata files and break them up into their constituent pieces. So if the metadata type kind of had a root type, like custom object, and then had child types like validation rule and custom field and web link and things like that, it breaks them up into little digestible chunks. And so here's the .object file, and it's actually pretty small, but that's not all of it. Here are the metadata files for the files and things like that, and all that's represented over here. And by the way, when you're working in these files, now that you can look at one and actually take it in at a glance, and then additionally, one moment, I'll get to you if you don't mind, taking it as a glance, Illuminated Cloud also has the XSD for the metadata files behind it, and so it will actually provide completion, validation, all that for these as you're editing them. So feel free to go in there and edit. Have some confidence about editing. It'll tell you if you've done something really, really, really wrong. And you can even go down here and like, what are the different types that you could choose for a field? There's nothing special that IC is doing here other than taking what Salesforce gives us, the XSD, and folding it into IntelliJ so that it sits behind this. So now you can actually work well within these files. Question?
Yeah, so one quick question. So you see on the side that about, by fields, it shows you the email field, phone field, and things like that. So does it also segregate those fields based on the class you're writing? Like, say a class is consuming this particular field, so is it going to do that also?
And by class, do you mean Apex class?
Yes.
Yeah, so those fields are actually part of the S-object definition and would have traditionally been in a .object file. And one of the features of Salesforce DX is to take those composite metadata files that got really big and unwieldy and hard to track over time through version control and things like that, .objects, .workflows, things like that, and it breaks them up into the parent-child relationship. So this is really just a field in an S object that can be referenced in Apex, or really any place you can talk about an S object, but it's not inherently a piece of Apex. It's a piece. It's a column in a database table. So, cool. So now let's kind of take a look. If I want to go and make a change here, if I want to go and actually see what it means to work with this, oh, and that's actually convenient. So here, doesn't follow the Scott rule for uppercase for functions. So we'll just go ahead and fix that. And now I'm just going to press Control S. And at the bottom, you're going to see that it's now pushing that. And we'll show in just a minute that's configurable. But right now it's going to push it. And after it pushes it, we're going to get some information about exactly what the push operation did. So it finished, and we can go into the messages window, and we can see, similar to what you would have seen on the command line, what succeeded, what failed. For what succeeded, was it an add, was it an update, was it a delete? So what did it mean to get the org in sync with the local file system? And you can do the exact same thing vice versa. So we can go over here into the org and go into that same class and use the old school editor here. And we can see that it changed the case of that. And let's just go ahead and add a comment here at the top. And I'll save that, and it just finished. And I'm just going to go up here and say I want to pull that. So I want to basically make the file system represent any changes that I've made in the org so that everything's back in sync. And hopefully in just a second here, you always have to wonder, when you're calling an asynchronous API, but hopefully in just a second.
So that's project-wide.
DX operates project-wide, and that is an important distinction. When you're working with an MD API project in Illuminated Cloud, you can do incremental pushes, incremental pulls, you can do very selective ones, you can retrieve from merge so that you can merge changes in. In Salesforce DX, you have push and you have pull, and it is doing some very intelligent state tracking under the hood, Salesforce DX, to know what needs to be moved where, but there's no notion of, I only want to go get this piece of metadata, or I want to pull it down into a temporary directory so I can look at it before I merge it in. None of that's there. It is just make that look like this or make this look like that. And so that's what I just did, and it just realized that only one thing changed. And you see two entries because the other one's the meta XML for it. They come down in pairs. Was that not your question?
Well, no, it was. I just had a follow-up question about, okay, so you're working with a few different developers. Unfortunately, the client puts you on the same sandbox org, and you have different Git branches.
Right. How
do you pull down specific metadata in that case?
So here's something really important about DX. Okay. You would not be collaborating in the same org.
Got it.
Every individual contributor would have their own scratch org, and in fact, you can't, as I understand it, you can't even share that across very easily, because the credentials that are brought down, I think actually the information about it's codified with like a key based on a local machine. I heard that. I don't know that for a fact, because there's just no auth access token underneath it and a refresh token. But the point is and by the way, this is something that I had a hard time making this intellectual leap when I first started getting my head wrapped around this. The point is that the DX promotes best practices in software engineering, which is that you're not clobbering each other and worrying about that. Instead, the version control system is the single source of truth, and if you need to do merging, you do it through that. So you have your scratch org and I have mine. We pull from VCS, work in our scratch orgs, make all the changes we want, push back to VCS, and then when all that's said and done, we convert the DX format into the MD API format and push that into the sandbox to update it. And ideally, we do that through some type of a CI process or CD process. But that's really important is, there's no need for conflict detection except with yourself. If you work on both sides and say pull or push, it'll tell you that, hey, you modified the same thing on both sides, decide which one's right, and tell me to force in that direction. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because you have to buy into that, and then you can buy into DX, right? And you should buy into that because it eliminates a whole swath of problems. So, so push and pull, you kind of saw those. All the other operations work though. I mean, those are driving the CLI underneath. And one thing I did want to show you real quick is if you didn't want if you didn't want push to automatically happen when you do Command S, Control S, you can just come in here and uncheck any of these that you want and just get to a point where it works like the CLI. CLI, you can make all your changes, you go to the CLI, you say SFDX force source push, right? Turn all these off and IC won't do anything on your behalf. You can still do it through IC by pushing these buttons or by using the keystrokes associated with it or the menu items, but it'll be on your at your leisure when you do that. So it's not going to do it in response to, say, just hitting Command S. So as far as the other operations in here, anonymous Apex, SOQL query, log viewer, all these things just work. And you can see here, if I pull this down, I said that scratch orgs are just connections. And so you can see them here, and I can choose a different one if I want. But if I just go out and run this, it'll go run against that org. It's not using SFDX to do that, it's using the built-in one for Illuminated Cloud, but everything works the way you'd want. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, the macro for select star, which you can't do in SOQL. So I'm just going to do an SEL star and hit tab, and it's going to ask me what object, and I'm going to hit enter, and now it's filled in all the fields, and I'm just going to go run that. And it works just fine against this org, right? And if I want to go look at the log viewer, and let's do something that'll actually produce some logs. Let's go over here to property controller, and I'm going to use a feature called go to related, and it's going to say, well, here's a test class that exercises this product class. It understands those relationships, and move over here, and then I'm going to go run this with coverage. And it's going to go run tests in the Scratch org, and then it's going to load the coverage from the Scratch org and show them visually in the user interface. And so it's done that, all tests passed. We can go over to here, we can see 24 lines are good. We can go into one of these classes, and it may or may not show up there. Yeah, the little green gutter annotations show you that those lines are covered. If they were red, you have some work to do. And now we can go over to log viewer, and it's going to load the logs in the org, and we should see that we've got run tests, and I can go take a look at the log. And if I wanted, I could go in and do retroactive debugging, post-mortem debugging on it here. So all that's directly integrated and just works, even though I'm working in a Scratch org. And it works the exact same way it would if you were in an MD API org. So, Salesforce DX, as far as the features, right now, one other thing I do want to show before I move on that makes it whole. So I'm going to go, this is just something I ran into when I was doing just a quick rehearsal on this. So I moved into one of my other projects, and it came up and it said, hey, something's wrong here, which as soon as it finishes indexing. Scratch orgs are ephemeral. Hopefully, if you're familiar with SFDX, you know that. So you go out, you say create an org, it's really cool, it creates it in just a minute or two, according to your org shape, and then you come in from your weekend a week or two later, and it's gone, right? And so it came up and said, you know what, there's something wrong. There's no connection behind this. And I said, well, what's going on here? Literally is what I did, because I had forgotten that I set these up 2 weeks ago. And I took a look, and that was red. So you can go in and do all your Scratch org management right here. I want to create a new Scratch org. So I'm just going to go in and say I want to create a new Scratch org, and I want to use the Scratch org definition here, and I want to give it an alias that was the same alias as before, which was df16-sfdx, because that is now the name it's going to use to refer to that over time. Everything else was loaded from that file, and I'm just going to say OK. And it's going to go out and it's going to create the Scratch org for me. This is so cool. It's creating an org for me. I didn't have to go into a web form and fill it out and wait for an email. It's doing this for me, and when it gets done in just a second, it's going to bind that to this project, and I'm just going to start working with that Scratch org. And I can go out and do a push, and it'll push all my metadata into it, and I'm good to go. And I ran into this kind of organically because I came into my other project, the Dreamhouse project, and it told me this. And my first inclination was drop the command line and go out and create my org. I thought, wait, I just wrote something to do this. And I went in and just like with 5 clicks, I was back in business. So that was pretty cool. So the point is with SFDX, now with push and pull, treating Scratch orgs as connections, the ability to use all the other tool windows with it, so it just created that Scratch org. That's it. It just created an org for me. I'm going to go to the drop down here, and I'm going to choose that. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to come back over here, and that's it. It's indexing based on the information for that, and it's going to be usable. With all that, you get pretty much the ability to work with SFDX projects end to end. So that's going to be the first deliverable. I'm actually, right now there are test builds of this you can go pick up. I'm actually going to release this maybe tomorrow, we'll see, maybe Monday. But it's pretty much ready to go. And this will just be part of the current released product. So full SFDX support. But that doesn't mean that I'm done. And this goes back to the SFDX philosophy. I had to do 4 clicks there in order to renew my Scratch org. That's going to happen regularly. We can streamline that. So I'm going to make it so that the Scratch org expiration is actually listed in the metadata. I'm going to make it so it tells you when that's going to expire. So if you're about to go home on a Friday and for some reason you got something in there and you haven't done a pull, go ahead and do a pull before you go home, because it's going to be gone. When you come in on Monday, it's gone. I'm just going to have it pop up and say, you want me to just go rebuild your Scratch org for you? 1 click, it's going to go do all those things I just did and rewire it and push your metadata out there and say, okay, you're good to go. Just streamline 4 or 5 clicks into one and just make this part of your ongoing process. The other thing that's important is, if you're accustomed to the model of your org, your dev org, your sandbox, and you've got functional integration test data set up in there, and maybe you've got some other classes that aren't really part of your product, but they're there just in order to automate some things, in order to be able to verify what you have. If you're used to that, you don't want to do that with your Scratch org that sits behind development. Think of that as being an extension of the screen right here. It is basically in support of writing code. The only tests that should ever execute there are unit tests. That doesn't mean that there's not value in integration functional tests. Exactly the opposite. You still need those. You just don't do that here. And so one of the features I want to add is, if you think about it, when you want to go test functionality, there's a small set of entry points for that. You want to test an Apex REST service, you want to test a Lightning app, or you want to test a traditional app, or a Visualforce page, or you have a static method that you want to go run through anonymous Apex. There's very few entry points to the way that you think of an application in Salesforce. And so you'll be able to set up a run configuration where you can go and say, here's my entry point, Salesforce DX entry point, and I just want to be able to hit run. If you've worked in other development environments, it'll create your application server, deploy your code to it, bring it up, maybe even open a web page on it. It's the exact same model. It'll go and bring up another Scratch org. If it already exists, it'll just repopulate it, push your code into it, maybe run a script that'll go do some post-processing steps like creating users, assigning permission sets, loading data, and it'll take you to that entry point. And that's the way that you'll work, and you'll keep your sacred Scratch dev org pristine as an extension of your development environment and not co-opt that for testing purposes, other than unit testing, which should be exactly what it says, which is testing of units. Right? So that's another feature. And then the other one is there's a lot of information the CLI will give you called for source status to say what on the local file system is not in sync with the server and vice versa. And I want to annotate. If you go over here and look, and actually it shows up better in this project over here, but if you go over here and look, you can see that some of these files are green, some are blue, some are black. This is actually the IntelliJ telling me the relationship of local files relative to the version control system behind it. Things that have been edited, things that have been added. And so I want to do the same thing with for source status. I want to make it so that it annotates and you can visually see the relationship between the local file system and the Scratch org. It's a little expensive to do that all the time in the background because it's running a CLI and things like that. So it'll probably be just another button up here and you can go and say, hey, overlay the for source status onto this. So those are three things I plan to add. They won't be in the first deliverable, but I plan to add. But aside from that, this is Salesforce DX integrated into Illuminated Cloud. So in terms of deliverables, the Salesforce DX stuff, like I said, will ship in the next few days. Be ready to go. Oh, one other thing I did want to show. One more thing. Boy, that's cliche, isn't it? So let's go over to, let's say, I don't know. Let's go over to here. The other thing that I integrated very recently, and in fact you can see it here, is Apex Doc. If you're not familiar with Apex Doc, if you used Java Doc, if you used ES Doc, JS Doc, things like that, it's basically an integrated documentation system for APIs. And so if you go to this constructor now and just start typing a document comment, which starts with /** versus a normal block comment, which starts with /*, and just hit enter, it'll look at the thing that you're documenting and it'll fill in basically a valid Apex Doc template for you. And at this point, you can go out and say, create a new shopping list mobile view controller and completion works. And if you want, you can also do HTML around it, make it nice and pretty, and go down here and say the standard controller, and I can say @C standard controller, and completion works here, and completion works on the tags and things like that, and it even works. Notice that it highlights the reference. This is now, if you were to go out and do like a rename, it's part of the references, so get renamed along with it, things like that. You can see it in here. And if I want to go and take a look at the documentation I've written, because I took the time to write it, the integrated documentation stuff just picks it up and formats it for you exactly like it would for Java Doc. So certainly encourage everyone to start writing effectively, kind of a literate programming type of model where you're documenting things well for yourself, whoever maintains your code after you, for the rest of the world, if you're publishing out to the rest of the world. I also recommend you do this for JavaScript in Lightning, and here's why. Anybody in here write Lightning code, Lightning JavaScript? A couple of people. So here's an interesting thing. JavaScript, untyped language, dynamic language. If I go down here, and this is IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, and this is its built-in JavaScript support. There's nothing I did. And I look at completions off of this, they're not very helpful. It's not based on that being a component. So I've got to go figure out what's going on. If I look at QuickDoc on this, it says, well, there's a couple of versions of this. Which one do you mean? If I restore that JS doc header, that actually gives hints for the type inference engine. And if I go back over here and do the same thing, I get really nice completions based on the fact that that's a component. And if I look at QuickDoc, I get really nice direct documentation for it. So don't just do this for Apex, do it for JavaScript, not just Enlightening. If you're doing Ember or Angular or something like that as a static resource bundle, do it there as well. Fill in your descriptions in your component and their attributes, things like that. So from a demo standpoint, that's what I wanted to show. So let me just talk real quick about the product itself. So I released 1.x almost 2.5 years ago, 1.0. Been continuously adding features to it. These are the last two features I wanted to put into the 1.x line. Salesforce DX support, because I think everybody should have it. Salesforce is releasing that. So Salesforce DX support and Apex docs so that people are documenting their code well. Okay. It is going to go into a feature freeze on that branch. All new feature development is going to be happening on 2.0. As you saw with some of the refactoring and code inspections and intentions, 2.0 is very well along. I'm hoping to release 2.0 finally before Dreamforce, so 5 weeks from now. The logistics aren't in the features, the logistics are in changing over to, and this gets the pricing, a subscription-based pricing model, which I'll be moving over to, be annual subscription-based. Salesforce is annual subscription-based, mimics that, new features coming out. And then more importantly, for all the existing users, everyone who is an existing license holder is going to get a discount on the first year's upgrade. I've got to go make that happen so that I'm not in the critical path on that every time. I don't want to wake up to like 500 emails and, hey, give me my discount code. I want that to be automated. So I've got to go figure out how to get that going. I think I'm on that. But those will be the logistics that would slow it down. So my goal is to get that out right before Dreamforce, and then I'm going to be representing at Dreamforce with some of the other features that have gone in. Hopefully at that point, I will be able to say, if you want to go get it, 30-day evaluation, take a look at it, hopefully you'll like it. So that's kind of the time frame of it. The pricing will go up some. It won't be a dramatic increase, but it will go up some. And again, it is going to change from being a perpetual model to being a annual recurring model. So that's kind of where it is. That's what I wanted to show. A lot of new features that have already gone in. A lot of features that will go in, I guess, tomorrow or Monday, and then beyond that, hopefully in the next month and a half or so, brand new release coming out.
Since your syntax base, you're very tightly coupled into the API version for Apex and for Salesforce that they rev 3 times a year.
Right.
What's sort of your plan of keeping people who haven't upgraded, supporting previous backward compatibility with different API versions, and of course sandboxes that are going to support the next.
Sure. I'm going to repeat the question just for anybody that might be watching this a little bit later. So the question is, pardon me for a second. Amazing when you talk for like 45 minutes constantly. So the question is, for the existing 1.x users, if they don't want to upgrade, 3 times a year, Salesforce is upgrading their API version, adding new things to it. What happens there? What's the ongoing maintenance?
As well as backward compatibility, well, the Apex code out there that they may need to rev, but stay locked into a previous API.
Right. So that's up to you. That's part of that's declarative in the metadata. That's no different than it is now. If you want to stay on 37.0 because you're not ready for global pick lists and standard pick lists, I think 37 was the tipping point there. You just keep that in your meta XML files and your package XML and all that, and you're good to go. Nothing changes there. The more important thing is I released 2.0 with Dreamforce, and Winter 18's released, and Spring 18's released, and Summer 18's released. What does it mean for existing IC users to be able to take advantage of new features there and things like that? Because the other direction just works. So my plan is, those are perpetual licenses. They don't stop working because 2.0 is out. So 2 things are going to happen there. While no new feature development will go in, I will rev it for seasonal releases, for a few seasonal releases. Right now I'm thinking the last one that I'll rev it for explicitly will either be Summer 18 or Winter 19. And when I do that, it's a pretty large update that I've got to go do. I've got to incorporate all the latest WSDLs, things like that. I've got to go and regenerate all the offline documentation for the integrated docs. So I'll get it updated for that, and obviously that will include the ability to choose that as your API version when you're setting up connections and things like that. Once I stop doing those updates, in order to be able to get new content updates, you would have to go to the 2.0 line. I am going to make it so that right now there's a drop down to choose the API version. I'm going to make it so you can go specify your own. So if the last one I support is 43 and now 44 is out, you can just go in and type 44. You can bring down the drop down, type 44 and keep moving on. What won't happen And you can regenerate the, if you're not familiar with the offline symbol table, it's a generated SDK. It gives you all the interfaces for programming Salesforce. At that point, if you go regenerate your OST, it'll pick up all the new classes and all that. You won't have integrated offline documentation for that because I won't have bound the correct URLs and things like that. And if there are, importantly, if there are changes to the grammar for Apex or SOCL or SOCL, I'm not going to go back and rev that either. So at that point, if there's something you need that's not there, you need to go to 2.0. But I plan to make it so people can continue to use it with no problems as long as they don't need those new features. So, one other point on that. Right now, my test matrix, I support IntelliJ, Community and Ultimate, back to IntelliJ 12, which came out in 2012. We are in 2017, almost at the end of it. So I support 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, Ultimate, Community, Mac, Linux, Windows. So that's a lot. And one of the other issues with that is the plugin SDK for IntelliJ has changed dramatically. I actually have to do 3 builds now because with conditional compilation in Java, that's fun, in order to make it work with all those. With 2.0, I'm going to drop support for much older versions. It's going to move up to newer versions. I'm not 100% sure yet if I'm going to go back to 15, 16, 17, or if I'm just going to say 17. So if folks have Ultimate Edition licenses on 12 or 13, my apologies. You'll either need to go to Community Edition, or you'll need to go ahead and update your license. But it is an encumbrance right now to getting releases out. I develop on 17, and the build, it takes me an additional amount of time to go get it working on every release. So the point is, if you're on an older version, you might want to start and you want to stay with Illuminated Cloud as they move into 2.0, you may want to think about what your upgrade path is there. There's a free version of it, Community Edition, or go get on the JetBrains subscription train as well. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So first off, thank you for improving my daily quality of life over the last year.
Happy to.
Because it's my workflow. One current pain point for me, we sort of made a transition to DX, we're using it every day. I often find myself having to switch scratch over several times a day.
Okay.
And right now, there's sort of, it's a bit, you have to generate the offline table, right? So there's some overhead there.
Yep.
Is that on the roadmap at all?
Yeah, there's an open story in the backlog, and in that story it basically talks about switching connections needs to be faster. That's really what it comes down to. And since scratch overs are connections, it falls under that. Yeah, one of the things I'm planning to do there is allow you to say, don't tell me I have an orphaned one over here and go generate a new one for me. Just use that one, because I think that's really the biggest thing that gets in the way. So yeah, that's something I'll take care of. Absolutely.
Do you have any way to bulk update the API version on Apex classes?
Yeah, regular expression search and replace.
Okay.
No, I mean I have an ant target that does it for me, but yeah, that's the best way to go do it.
What about you have test code in the main class?
Are you the one? Was that you?
What?
So somebody hit me with that the other day. So you're talking about if you've actually got a test method in a product class?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. I didn't actually even realize that was supported, because if you use the isTest annotation, it won't even save. Turns out if you use the test method modifier, it does.
So if you've got code from 6 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, right now you can't run that test. There's an open bug on that I originally pushed back on until I was put in my place and told that that's actually okay. So I'm going to fix that bug, and you'll be able to go out and right-click on that test or include it in Test Suite. So it'll be in there. Now here's the thing, when I say I was put in my place, I say that tongue-in-cheek, because what I was told was, yes, you can do that if you use the test method modifier. I think just period. I don't think even the older API versions, because they have to continue to respect it. If you use isTest, it won't allow you to do it, the annotation. But the second part of that response was, for proper separation of concerns, you should have product code and test code. And with DX, as you saw, it encourages that even more so, because you actually manage them separately. So the response was, it's a static method. Move it into a test class. Get it out of the product class, unless there's a really good reason for it to be there. Because you can go and say test visible and things like that in order to get access to things you otherwise wouldn't have access to. But that's a bug that's on my backlog right now that I'll be fixing very soon.
You think about, so we probably have 200, we got code from 2009.
Yeah.
We probably have 200 Apex classes in the test group. You think of an easy way to auto-create the test classes and move all the test code in?
So once I ran into this, I thought, wow, that's an awesome inspection and intention.
Okay.
Go run it across your entire code base. You have a test method in a product class, move it to one, and if it needs to create one for you, it will, right? And have it go do that, and you can just run the inspection across your entire code base and hit a single button and it'll do it. That's one I'm planning to implement. So until I do that, right, it's the win. So, yeah, but that I think that would be handy for people that are in that exact situation, because it's not that people don't want to do it, it's just effort, right? Yeah. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? I know there was one about keys. We can probably chat about that after, but I will just say this. Learn the key bindings if you use this tool. Learn the key bindings. You will find your productivity goes up dramatically. One thing I did do is, in kind of preparation for that, is they have their own key map. Brains puts out a key map cross-platform, but I kind of maintain this as I bind to existing features in the IDE, and they have kind of a value add when you're working with Salesforce code. I try to make sure it's captured here. So my recommendation every time that question comes up is, do I have a favorite key binding? The answer is yes, and just kind of stop there, because it may sound silly, I pretty much use all these on a daily basis. I may represent the extreme end of that spectrum, but I would recommend going through this and just trying each one and seeing, does it add value for you? Get used to it, see what it does. They're very, very handy. They're amazing accelerators. Okay.
Besides this, are there any other things to sort of jumpstart you to being a power user, like videos or anything you recommend?
Yeah, the demo from last year's Dreamforce I think will be a good one. It's a 40-minute demo, and it walks through most of the features. I've tried to, I have videos that are older for about like creating new projects. I need to just go throw those away and start over, because literally in 2 years I changed all that so dramatically. They're so dated. I need to go and re-record those. But I do have some more recent ones that have to do with the debugger, the retrospective debugger. I call it the offline Apex debugger. Does anybody not know what that is? Because you can actually debug Apex code without paying like $15,000 for a debugger license. Like this. Wow, that's really interesting. That got ugly fast, didn't it? Oh, that's the wrong window. You want to look at the source code for the IDE? So let's just go in here, and I'm just going to go and right-click on this test and say debug, and it's going to ask me. So it's using a log, right? It's going to you're going to do replay debugging, and so I'm going to go in here and say I want to debug with full debugging, and okay, so I am now debugging, and I'm just going to use the standard debugging keys, and watch what happens down here. And I can step in to this constructor, and I can look at my stack and step out, step into a property accessor, step out. So this is not suspended a process or anything like that. It's taking a really, really, really verbose log file and building it into a set of stack frames and letting you walk through that using debugger commands. And you can do this not just for unit tests. You can go do this in anonymous Apex, or you can go and set your log levels, and you can go run scheduled Apex or batch Apex or an Apex REST service, and then you can go in and basically get the log in the log viewer over here. So if I say stop this, and I go over to the log viewer, and I look at that same log, I refresh. So that happened out of band, and I go over here and I hit the debug button, I'm right back in. So you can go debug async processes. So, there's a video on this that shows how to use this as well. And there are tricks to it, because you can get that maximum debug log size reached, in which case you need to start using checkpoints, and you actually step checkpoint to checkpoint instead of line to line. You can still see exactly what's going on in your code. So if anybody's programmed Apex for any length of time, found yourself frustrated that you couldn't go in and use a symbolic debugger, you can, right there. So. And I do plan, I was actually talking with Nicholas Chen today about the real-time debugger, and I do plan to add integrated support for that as well. And hopefully Salesforce will make that, as it is for ISVs, you get a single license, and hopefully with Scratch orgs and kind of lighter weight footprint environments, less contention for the shared resources, open transactions, that'll become more ubiquitously available, and we'll all be able to go in and just whenever we want do some symbolic debugging. I imagine Nick's going to kill me for having just said that, in the sense of saying hopefully, because I don't think that's exactly where they are right now. They're still basically saying right now there's heavy resource contention right there, and they have to use it sparingly. But the point is I think that the end goal would be that we're all able to go in and do true symbolic debugging. So.